Hello! Today we are making a cheese and garlic and herb quick bread. It comes together quickly and beautifully. I like to call this a beautiful disaster bread because it looks absolutely terrible when you put it in the oven, and it comes out beautiful and it's delicious, and it's very impressive, and I just like how it starts out so awful looking and turns into a beautiful creation. So it's always fun to take it out of the oven. So here's what we need. You need buttermilk. This is 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk. I generally make my own buttermilk, which I will explain more later. You need olive oil, rosemary, thyme, dill, and parsley. You need 2 eggs, 2 cloves of garlic, 5 ounces of cheese, salt, baking soda, baking powder, and of course flour. Now I'm using just regular flour for this recipe. All-purpose flour is fine. I have used bread flour before and it turns out just as well. First step in this recipe is taking a 1/2 tablespoon of all of the herbs and putting them into a small dish. So we have now a 1/2 tablespoon would be like 1.5 teaspoons of each dried herb. So dill, rosemary, thyme, parsley, they're all in here. And then to that we add 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and we just kind of let this mingle a while. So that's our first step. Now you can use fresh herbs. You would use double fresh herbs. So you would use 4 tablespoons of fresh herbs, but generally dried is what I have on hand. This recipe is fantastic because I always have everything. I don't generally have buttermilk, but I whip it up myself with some milk and some vinegar. And so this is a recipe that I can always pull together easily. You can also substitute different herbs in this. You know, maybe you don't want to put any parsley in, or maybe you don't care for rosemary. You could sub in something else. Maybe some oregano or basil, or, you know, whatever you feel like trying. At this point in time, I like to preheat my oven. We're going to go at 350 degrees. This bread does come together really quickly, and as I said, it's a quick bread. It has no yeast, but it does have other ingredients to get that rise. So we're going to start by adding a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Here I have a bowl that we're going to put all of our dry ingredients. So far we have 2 1/4 cup of flour and a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. To that, we are going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Word to the wise, don't mix those two up. Doesn't work out. Creates a bad taste. Been there, done that. Okay, 2 teaspoons, and then also a teaspoon of salt. Now these are all of our dry ingredients. Once we put our salt in. Okay, teaspoon of salt going in. And these are all of our dry ingredients. So we're just going to give this a little mix together. Just mix it all around. Now we're going to combine our wet ingredients in a smaller bowl, and then we're just going to add it to this. All right, so we're combining our liquid ingredients. I put the 2 eggs in a small bowl here. Now to that we're going to add the buttermilk. So this is 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk. And how you can make that easily with milk and vinegar is you put 1 cup plus 3 tablespoons of milk in a measuring cup. And to that you add a tablespoon of vinegar, and you give it a little stir, and you let it set a while. And it will kind of become a little thicker. You'll notice a little curdling. You can see that here. And that is how you create your own buttermilk. I think, I just never have buttermilk. I mean, it's very seldom, so I would say like maybe, I don't know, 1 out of 20 times when I make this bread, I actually have buttermilk. but most of the time I don't, and this just turns out just fine. So now we're going to add our garlic, 2 cloves of garlic, minced, and they're in my press. You can use granulated garlic, but I prefer the flavor of fresh. Then you just give your liquid ingredients a real light mix around, and you're ready to incorporate them into the dry ingredients. So here's our dry ingredients. We're just going to pour them in, and we're going to mix it. Now this makes a thick batter. It's going to alarm you most likely when you're getting ready to bake this bread. Like, is this going to turn out? It's so thick. But rest assured, it does. And it turns out really nicely. Now the next step you want to do is to prepare your bread pan. I use a glass bread pan. I spray it with cooking spray, non-stick cooking spray. This recipe makes 1 loaf. So here we have our liquid, our batter, our oiled bread dish, 5 ounces of cheese cut up. Doesn't really matter how you cut it, but I do recommend like chunks versus slices, though slices will work in a pinch. And we have our herbs sitting in our oil. And the first thing we're going to do is take approximately half of this batter and put it into the bottom of our dish here. Okay. Now, it's going to kind of level out on its own. The next thing we're going to do is dollop about half of our herbs in our olive oil. Give them a little mix around. And we're just going to pop some on there. And now we take a butter knife, and I always think this is fun, and we just kind of swirl these around. And we're kind of making this herby layer here. Again, nothing perfect. We'll save that knife because we'll be using it later. And now we'll take about half the cheese, and we're just going to stick it in here. Doesn't really matter how you do it. You do want to kind of evenly disperse it to the best of your ability. This is just going to kind of ensure, you know, cheese all over the place. Okay. Now I'm going to repeat these steps. The rest of the batter, the rest of the herbs, swirl it with my butter knife, and then insert the remaining cheese, and I will show you what it looks like. All right, we have our second layer on, and now what we're going to do is just lightly just kind of cover this with foil, because we do have to bake this quite a while, and we don't want the top to get overly browned until, you know, the end. And we don't want it to, you know, have bad things happen to it. So we're going to cover it with foil. We're going to pop it in the oven for 40 minutes at 350, and then we will remove the foil and cook it some more in the oven. And here's just how it looks, slightly covered with the foil. It doesn't need to be airtight or anything. We're just trying to block a little bit of direct heat on the top. Okay, it just came out of the oven after the 40 minutes. Now we're going to take off the foil and put it back in. We're going to check it after 20, but it might be more like 30 that we'll need. Okay, so this is the completed bread after another 20 minutes. So a total of 1 hour cook time, 40 minutes with the foil on, 20 minutes with it off. Of course, if yours isn't quite finished yet, you would want to, leave it in a little longer. And now we're going to turn it out onto a rack to cool. Now you want to let this bread cool quite a bit before you slice it so you don't have molten lava cheese oozing everywhere. So we're going to let it cool about a half an hour on the rack, and then we will slice it. And here it is all sliced. I do a thicker slice, about 1 inch thick. And just make sure you use a nice serrated long knife so you can get a nice cut. And you can see it looks gorgeous. Much better than the disaster that we stuck into the oven. And it smells so good and it tastes so good. This bread is excellent with any soups or stews, or even like a slice to accompany like a scrambled egg. It has so many great purposes. It's easy to whip up with mostly your stable ingredients. And one final thing I forgot to mention is with the cheese, you can experiment with that too, just like with the herbs. I like to use a sharp cheddar, but I have played around with some others. If I have a couple ounces of cheddar and I have a couple ounces of provolone, it's not going to be bad. It's going to have a different taste, but it's still going to be absolutely delicious. So I hope you enjoyed this recipe, and if you did, check out my other recipes that I have.